Welcome to the Woodward Chronicles. This series is dedicated to honoring the legacy of Mr. Ronald Woodward, who served as Wabash County Historian from 1981 to 2025 and was awarded the title of Wabash County Historian Emeritus by the Indiana Historical Society. Mr. Woodward shares Wabash County's recorded history in his own words. Each episode invites us to listen, learn, and reflect on the rich stories from the past. Settle in. We're glad you're here.
So I have the pleasure of sitting down with Wabash County's historian, official historian. So just a little bit, if you would, please. Mr. Woodward, I was reading your biography and absolutely astonished by your commitment to preserving Wabash County's history, not only as an educator, but as a volunteer, just as a civic leader. But I did jot down a couple of questions I wanted to ask you about. I won't make you share your date of birth, but you were born in New Albany.
New Albany, Indiana.
And you just celebrated 55 years of marriage to your wife, Diana.
Yes.
How did you two meet?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story, I guess. Back years ago in 1969, I was getting ready to go in the Navy and was doing some substitute teaching because I was on a 90-day delay program. So I had 90 days to kind of kick around. So I did some substitute teaching in the greater Clark County school system, Clarksville, Indiana, Jeffersonville area. And one day, after a trying day of substituting a math class for high schoolers at Jeff High, I went to a local mall and things happened. I was just walking through to relax, maybe get a Coke, but all of a sudden I was surrounded by a group of girls, 5 or 6, all of them teenagers, and one I happened to know, and she knew me, and they were hitting me in the head with rolled up papers. And I finally managed to get away from them, but one of them kind of caught my eye. I kind of followed her in all this action, but I got away from them. And then as I was walking out of the mall to find my car, I lost my car. I don't know if you remember, but there was a time when McDonald's and places like that would give you these little balls that you could put on your radio antenna of your car. Yeah. And I had one of those because I'd done that before. I lost my car. There were only maybe 2,000 or 3,000 cars in that parking lot, but I had forgotten. And there they were. And they helped me find my car. And I looked at this one who kind of got my attention while they were mauling me. And I just blurted out, "How would you like to go to Frisch's and get a Coke?" And, "Oh, yeah," which made the other girls mad because they kind of, the driver of the car she was with really wanted to go out with me. Whatever that means. I don't know why. But anyway, we met at the mall and we went to Frisch's, and of course her friends followed just to make sure she was safe. That's the way it was in those days. And when they figured out everything was okay, they just left her and we had our Coke and then went home and made some further plans. And then for the next 90 days until I reported to Uncle Sam, when I had free time, we were driving around, going to the movies and the kind of things that young people would normally do. Then when I got out of boot camp, we decided that we'd marry, and she followed me through my Navy career.
Wow. And 55 years, 4 children.
Yes.
3 girls and a boy.
Wendy, Heather, Brandy, and Russell.
Do they all live close?
Well, two are deceased.
Okay.
Brandy and Heather.
Okay.
And Russell lives here in Wabash, and Wendy lives over in LaGros. She works out at Alloy,
Oh, yeah.
Real Alloy, in charge of their inventory. So, and Russell's self-employed. So they're local.
Yeah.
We also have, trying to count here real quick, three grandchildren and six. We just had a new one a couple of months ago, great-grandkids.
And how did you land? So you, after your service in the Navy, and you did that for 4 years, right?
4 years, yes, ma'am.
And when did you land in Wabash County?
Well, after the Navy, we went to Ball State University so I could pursue my master's degree, and stayed there for about a year and a half following the master's program and graduating through it. In the summer of 1974, things looked kind of iffy. We weren't sure where we were going. I had graduated but was thinking about going into the PhD program. Oh, there was a possibility of a job in Nashville, Tennessee. And during my time at Ball State, I had taken a course in Civil War history with a man from Wabash by the name of George Dingledye. I don't know if you ever met George or not, but he was a co-owner of a appliance store on East Market Street, and for 4 years he was mayor of Wabash. He was also on the school board for a number of years and was involved with Rotary and other civic organizations. In one of the courses that I took, Civil War history with him, we would talk before the teacher got there, and he was sharing a project that he had in mind of transcribing a Civil War diary of a man from Wabash County. And we were talking about that, and we got involved in talking even after class about the subject. And I helped him as much as I could. He remembered that, and since he was on the school board, he said, you know, we're losing some teachers this year. We're losing about 16 teachers in the junior high and the high school, and there's going to be a couple of social studies sections open. You might apply.
Yeah.
Was the way he
Wink,
put it.
wink. You might consider it.
You
Yeah.
might consider it. So I did, and I applied, and I credit him with bringing me here, and I'm sure he had a lot to do with getting me hired. I was originally hired in August of 1974 to teach at the high school, and I was going to teach U.S. history, and they were going to completely change the way the history course was going to be taught. Instead of going through a textbook, they wanted to have 6 different periods of study: women's history, Indiana history, Civil War history, various phases of history in general, and just last for a 6 weeks period. They didn't have any books for it. They didn't have anything ready, but they hired me and said, you work it out.
Make this work.
Right. Well, they never ordered the books that I wanted. And when I got here, I was supposed to report a week early, and I met with the principal. And quite frankly, the principal didn't like me. And the principal of the junior high school called me up, and he said, could you come in and see me? And that was Bill Kramer. And I went in. He said, Ron, you're hired. You signed a contract for U.S. history at the high school. We really need a geography teacher at the 7th and 8th grade level. And they need an assistant football coach. And the person I hired for the geography position is a football coach. So would you mind switching? So a week before, after all the prep and getting things ready, we switched. And it was probably the best thing for me. I really enjoyed 7th and 8th graders. I was really reluctant because I had been a military instructor, and now I was I had trained at high school level and taught at military level, and now they wanted me to go to 7th and 8th grade. And like most people, I was afraid and scared. But that quickly changed. First of all, Bill Kramer was an excellent principal, and he made you feel comfortable and at ease. And sure, the first couple of years, I did make a few mistakes. You just ask Connie Gorman. We team taught, and it really became an interesting time. And it wasn't geography. It was an introduction to kids of all the social sciences. So 6 weeks, we would deal with economic history, another with governmental history, another with world cultures. It just varied. Psychology and sociology as well. Like I said, it just varied. But that took some getting used to, and Connie really helped on that, and Mr. Kramer did as well. And the kids put up with me. I had a stern demeanor. When I was in college, they were taught, if you're strict when you start, you can get easier and things get along well. If you start off easy and try to get hard, it gets worse. Plus being previously with the military, it's this way or else type
Right,
of thing.
sure.
But they let me be creative. In the governmental section, Connie and I developed a lesson plan where we were able to take students to the courthouse and actually put on a court trial with one of the students being a judge and the other officers of the court. And we prepared a case that they could try. We selected a jury, and the jury could decide what the case would be.
Well, we can't just skip over this. That is really an incredible way for experiential learning for these young people.
Yeah.
And they don't do that anymore, at least not that I'm aware of.
No.
Just for clarity, you referenced Connie Gorman. Was she a teacher at the same time then?
Yes, she was a teacher at the junior high school at the same time. Later on, she went to the high school.
Okay.
And now, as a retired teacher, she's now on the school board at present time. Very pleasant, charming lady with a lot of experience. And she allowed me to explore those kind of things and to kind of help with them. In another instance, maybe I shouldn't say this, you can cut it if it doesn't fit, but I had just taken a 1.5 year studies at Ball State, and I'd taken an anthropology course in the anthropology of American film. So I tried to bring those kind of films into the classroom for the students to see. Now, these are 7th graders. And generally, they were National Geographic type films. And one of them was Nanook of the North, which was about Eskimos and their life. And the kids, they could really get into that lifestyle and all and learn from that. But there was one film that really struck me as very good. It was called The Tribe That Hides from Man. I'll never forget it. It was about a South American tribe that was so far deep in the jungle that very few people knew about it, and an anthropologist went there and made a film of them. The opening scene were 3 men chasing a pig. The men had nothing on, and it was full frontal nudity, running into the camera, with these large spears, 6-foot-long spears, and they had just killed a pig by ramming one of those spears up its tail end. At that point, I asked Connie, I think I need to step down and ask the principal if this is suitable. I went into Mr. Kramer's office and I explained, just like I told you, maybe a little bit more vivid. And he laughed and chuckled and he said, Ron, that's a decision you're going to have to make. I went back and I continued showing it. At lunchtime, when I went down to the cafeteria to eat, the kids were talking about it. Oh, you should have seen this pig. It had a spear. And its backside run. They didn't even notice the nudity because of the pig.
Yeah.
We did show it to the rest of the other classes, but I never showed that film again. But that's one of those learning experiences that the school allowed me to learn. And if Mr. Kramer had any complaints, he never let me know about it. And we decided among ourselves, no, we won't do this again.
But I bet the kids remembered it. And they learned from it.
I hope so.
Yeah, it was definitely
hope
memorable.
so.
Wonder what dinner was like at their house when
Oh,
they got
my.
home from school that night.
All I know is in the cafeteria, they were sure telling kids about it, and they were just waiting for lunch to be over and be in class so they could see that.
I bet. I was not fortunate enough to have you as my history teacher or geography teacher. I went to Southwood High School, but it's always interesting when I hear from your past students how instrumental you have been in their lives and what they have learned from you in that role. And so your accolades and awards for teaching are well earned. Well earned. I could read through several of these, but I was trying to take notes, and then all of a sudden my notes got as long as your biography, and I was like, well, this is getting ridiculous. But you retired from teaching after how many years was it?
27 years here at Wabash, but I also taught at Manchester College and at the Vocational Center as well.
And you received 4 times, you were named Who's Who Among America's Teachers. You were a certificate of award from the DAR in 2015. You also were a Distinguished Citizen Award in 2013 for the City of Wabash. This list of accolades and dedication to the community is so inspiring and, like I said, really well earned, and we'll make sure that we have your entire biography in our database as well for those to reference. So you also, in addition to teaching, you've also written 38 plus books.
Yes.
Was that after you retired from teaching, or did you do that simultaneously?
Simultaneously and at present. Right now I'm working on 1950 to 1999 in Wabash County. It's the third book that I've had that chronologically takes the development of Wabash County, and I'm already completed from 2000 up to the present time, but we're just waiting to publish that at a later date. But going back to the school, if I may.
Yeah, please.
The thing to me, you mentioned some of the allocates and awards. Mm-hmm. Those all pale. I actually learned more from my students than what they may be aware of. A lot of my interests outside of the classroom in Wabash County history have been sparked by the interest that students showed me. One of the things I like to do is talk about the ghost stories of Wabash County. And kids would come to me and they would, oh, my house is haunted. The doors open and close, things float through the air. They would come to me with stories, and then they would ask me, can this really be happening? Can you explain it? So I began to look at the stories of Wabash County because of their interest, look at those stories and try and see if I could find answers that might solve those mysteries for kids. A lot of people are really afraid to talk about that kind of subject, and in doing so, they keep stories to themselves, and when they come out with those stories, they find, oh, other people have had similar. So what causes these similar experiences? So I've learned just as much from the kids as I think they may have learned from me. I have tried very hard in my teaching career, one, to make social studies very interesting. Mm-hmm. A lot of people in school, it's their worst subject. They don't want to, you got to memorize this, you got to memorize dates, you got to do this and that, and it doesn't relate to me. I always thought that I relate to history and history relates to me. We're all a part of history, and we're all forming our own form of history and our own role and place within the history of not only our country our state, but our local community. And that was important to me, to try and instill a desire to want to learn once you're out of the classroom. Because actually, if you think about it, a lot of our learning takes place outside of high school. High school is very good at giving us the foundations of our learning, but it's afterwards, if we have that spark of interest and know how to pursue to find the answers ourselves, that's what really excites myself, and I think excites other people, is when, oh, I went to that restaurant, I ate there, I knew that, I knew this person, oh yeah, and I remember this. Now they're becoming part of history. And geography is a part of history. They all work together and go together. So,
Do you miss the teaching in the classroom at all?
yes and no, to be honest with you. I miss the interaction with the students. I really miss when that light bulb comes on and they, oh, yes, now I know. Yes, that makes sense. Or when they've created something and I can do that. When that lights up their face, there's no monetary reward that can take that place. But on the other hand, I haven't left it. I have a Facebook page now that a lot of people go to, and every day I try to post something new or different about the local history. And every once in a while, I get someone who I don't have the faintest idea who they are or how old they are, or sometimes they tell me that, well, I used to live next to you, or I was one of your students, and I really love this story that you told today. I really didn't understand that before. I'm new to Wabash County, and now you've shed a light on something that I go by every day and didn't know about. That keeps me going. That carries me through in retirement. Plus, in retirement, I'm free to pick and choose, and there's something to be said for that. But in the classroom, you're more structured, so you have to know what you're going to do before you go in, and you have to know what you're going to say. In other words, you have to do the research beforehand. But there was always that one student. Well, yes, Mr. Woodward, but, and they come up with some ideas that you never thought of. And that was what was intriguing to me about 7th and 8th grade, is I didn't expect that from them. I thought you were going to have to wipe noses and tie shoestrings and babysit them. But I quickly found out that if you treated them right, they reciprocated that feeling. And at the same time, they could come up with challenging questions, because sometimes the smarter we get, the less we want to ask questions because somebody might think we don't know something.
Yeah.
So there was that freshness that students offered.
How many students did you have in a class at a time? What was the class size when you were?
Oh my, it would vary. When I first started in, let's say, just take the 7th grade class, there were about 240 students. And there were 2 teachers, and the other teacher in my section would teach 2 classes, and I would have the others. So I had roughly anywhere from 186 to 200 or more in a day. In a regular class, which then was 45 minutes long, I would have 32 to 38 at a time, which were extremely large classes. By the time I retired, because of what was going on in the community at the time in 2001, businesses leaving and closing and that kind of thing, we still had 2 teachers, but I would have roughly 25 students, roughly 20 per class, and then I would have an 8th grade class as well.
That is a decline that I think we've continued to see even since the early 2000s.
Right, right.
It was class sizes.
Now, how can you deal with 38? Really, I didn't have a problem. I came on strong.
The Navy background came
Right,
up. Yeah.
right. And quite frankly, there were some who, if you ask them, they'll tell you, oh, I was afraid of him, but I never really killed anybody. But one day, English teacher across the hall from me was a very petite woman and elderly, and she taught English. And one day, two ninth graders got into a fight in her classroom, and they brought it out into the hallway. And one of the boys grabbed the other one and slammed him into a locker, cutting open his head. So there was blood everywhere. And I rushed out of my room. I had a white shirt on. I grabbed each of them by the neck, separated them, blood pouring down all over my shirt and pants, and got them down to the principal's office and got that all taken care of, got back to my classroom. You could hear a pin drop when I walked in and all that blood on my shirt and pants. And I taught like that until my wife was able to bring over some new clothes for me. So things like that, oh gosh, he kills people. Oh Lord, you should have seen the blood pouring off. Oh. Those kind of things just kind of help. And kids go home, and of course it becomes an even bigger story and all. But I think if you made it through the first week of my class without wetting your pants, you were okay.
That's a good rule to live by, especially when people heard the story about your bloody shirt. You never taught in the old high school then. When did the original Wabash High School get torn down?
Oh, in the 1980s.
So you would have not...
No, I taught at the middle school.
The middle school.
In 74, and the middle school was built about 1960. The high school that we have today was built in 1925, and when the high school moved there, the old high school on Hill Street became the junior high school.
Until when?
1960, when the new junior high was built.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay. When I hear you talk about, you've been a resource to Visit Wabash County for over a decade, specifically just to the work that we do. And I know not only myself, but Stephanie Rogers, who's in that office, and Jennifer Long-Dillon, when they have ideas or trolley tour ideas or questions about or they're building tours, you've always been so gracious to share that knowledge with us and then provide resources. You know, back in the day when I was young, you probably remember the Encyclopedia Britannicas. I mean, everybody had a set in their home, most certainly in the library at school. And sometimes that's how I feel I'm about you as a resource, because most likely you have something. If we have a question about a topic, a location in Wabash County, you may not have it at your fingertips today. But if you go home in the Mr. Woodward Encyclopedia Britannica collection, we know that you most likely are going to be able to find it, and you've written about it. We find it so important for us then to pass along through our experiences, our history and our culture, and with a lot of insight from you. When were you officially titled the Wabash County Historian?
Well, another story.
Yeah.
In 1980, when George Dingledye was elected mayor, he selected me to be Wabash City Historian, which was the first time we had an official city historian. And we were one of the first communities in the state of Indiana to have such an office. And he had known me from the Historical Society and from my teaching and our visiting and talking with one another. He used that position for me to be able to meet with visitors and share the community history and to do other projects that involved me to expand out into the community. Now, that was in 1980. In 1981, the Indiana Historical Society decided to reinstitute their Wabash County Historian program. They'd had one in the 1960s, and Mary O'Hare, who was the curator of the museum, she ran that program until she retired in 1970. Bill Gray taking her place. My name came forward, and the next thing I knew, the state asked me if I'd like to have the position. At that time, it was for only 3 years. And up until this year, I served in that capacity. This year, I no longer serve as the Wabash County Historian. A new young man is filling in that position now, Alex Ginnan. So I'm what they now call, because they didn't know what to do with me, Wabash County Historian Emeritus. So they've given me a new title. I don't know if they've done that with anyone else. They still keep me on their rolls, but I'm kind of sidelined and pushed to the side unless they need me.
Have you met with Alex?
No, I haven't.
Yet? Okay.
No.
I was going to ask you, why do you think it is important for a community or a county to have someone designated as that historian?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the county historian program of the Indiana Historical Society and the Indiana Historical Bureau. And I think it's great that they recognize someone. But in the 92 counties that make up Indiana, there are people who know even more than the county historians. These are unsung heroes that are in the community who people like yourself learn over time that you can go to them and find out bits and pieces of history that you never knew before, or they can lead you in other directions. Having a title enables you to reach out past the community and have other people recognize that you're an authority. But these hidden people who are just known as local historians, they do a tremendous job and are underrated and have been left out of the scene. They work on committees of all sorts and of community projects and programs, and they get things done and they get things recognized that sometimes other people can't do. With a title, you can go to the state and say, we kind of need this and we need this kind of help, and you get maybe more authority. But these people, well, that sign needs to be repainted that's marking that historical site, and they go to somebody and they get it done. And nobody ever knows that it was done, or they're not given credit. They don't seek that credit. And there are a tremendous number of people like that in this community. Those who come to mind right away, Ron Thrush over in Rich Valley, the mayor of Rich Valley. He's passed away, but he wrote 3 booklets on that area and saved and preserved a tremendous amount of information. Another person who's unsung and you very seldom hear about anymore is Pete Jones. Pete Jones just has a wealth of knowledge that he lived through and experience that I can only read about. He's also preserved our history with books that he's written, putting together bits and pieces of our history as well. I could go on and on and on. There are all these people out there who you just don't hear about them. They don't toot their own horn, but they know everything about basketball in Wabash, or they know everything about football or Little League. They know all the stats and statistics all the way back. They're out there, and they have their love of history, and they try to preserve it as well. So there's a lot to be said for them, and they're the unsung heroes of the county, and they're in every county. They're just not as well known as the county historians. And any county historian worth their salt, if they run into a situation that they can't answer a question, well, I think you ought to go such and such. They'll tell you, they know.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be. So history is being preserved, not quite as much as we sometimes might like for it to be. And when these people die, a library just disappears. It's the way it goes.
You alluded to your Facebook page. So I did a little checking. You have over 11,000 active subscribers. Now, that doesn't mean followers, but these are people who are actively want notified every single time that you post enough. 11,000. And each of your posts generally are accompanied by a photograph of sort or an image of sort, could be an ad. And then you always are so gracious to follow up if you have more to follow up to support what you're posting about. Where did you acquire so many, I mean, 38 books over the course of some time? Where have you acquired all of these artifacts? And then also, where do you keep them? I just imagine 2 rooms in your home. Like poor Diana's like, oh, Ron, we've got 2 rooms of filing cabinets in your home. So one, how did you acquire your artifacts or your photos? And then the other is, where do you keep them?
Well, you'd have to ask my wife how she feels about all this. Our dining room table has stacks. When I get through one stack, 2 more develop. I'm a clipper. Whenever I see something in a newspaper that interests me, I clip it out, and I've been doing that for 50 years. I've found old newspapers, so I save articles out of them. Mm-hmm. I've read every newspaper written in Wabash County that's available on microfilm up to the present time. That includes the paper, the Plain Dealer, and the Gazette, and all the others that go way back to 1849, and sometimes I've read them twice. I'm always going to book sales. The used bookstore downtown on South Wabash Street was an excellent place. Stuff ended up there that you never knew how it got there or why. And every once in a while, I still run into something new that I've never seen before. Also, you alluded that I have 11,000 followers. A lot of those people, if you take a look at what I post, you'll find that the people who follow me contribute. Mm-hmm. If there's something that they particularly like and it jogs a memory, they are gracious enough to write it down for me and pass it on to me and allow me to share it with others. So just recently I did Jenny Dye and Dye's
I saw that.
Grocery, and I couldn't believe 530 people took the time to post a message of something they remembered, from the gumball machine to how much it cost for a sandwich and a beer. And that's where I learn a lot, is by listening to others talk. Sometimes people think I may be asleep in a meeting or something, but I'm listening intently to what people say, and I'm filing it away for what I might be able to use later on. Mm-hmm. And what really intrigues me about Wabash is that we have so many places that have so many stories. And by reading the newspaper, I sometimes find these stories, but I want to share them. So I have to dig further and find a little bit more information, and then I find that story. But in the process of finding the answer to that story, I find another story, and it just keeps snowballing. And I can't help but walk around downtown and think of all the stories that go behind that one building, and how many other buildings were there and what were in them, and the stories that one could tell. And there are plenty. So sharing those stories has enabled me to reach another audience that these people feel empowered to share their stories, because there's a lot of people in Wabash. I got to go back a little bit here. When I came to Wabash in 1974, there was a negative image about Wabash among its population. We're Walbatucky, and that didn't mean well. And there were people who'd come to me and say, there used to be a time when you didn't have to lock your doors. There was a negative vibe in the community. And that negative vibe hung around quite a bit. And even businesses didn't take pride in themselves. It took a little time, but eventually we came out of that, and we're a much better, vibrant community today because we could put aside some of this negativity that we had developed back in the 70s. And a lot of it occurred nationally. It was national. We were feeling bad about ourselves as a country, and that reflected in the community. So it wasn't just any one thing, but then there began to be small little talk about, well, this business is closing, this factory's going, and the population did decline. It declined from about 15,000 to quickly to 13, and then down to 10. But now we're seeing people who are taking a more active role in having pride in their community. And when you do that, you begin to realize that there's something more than just yourself in the community, that the buildings have stories to tell, and that people lived in them and they shared their life stories. Things begin to make you feel better. And as you begin to feel better, you begin to look around your community, you begin to make things better. I remember we had a man in town who was in the upper society, but he would walk around downtown and pick up paper that was laying on the ground. People like that began to take pride. And when you saw that, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And buildings began to refurbish, clean the outside, the insides, and the downtown, and we have what we have today. Not that we're totally perfect, but it's much cleaner and safer than it ever has been, in my estimation. And the pride has come back. And with that, the sharing of stories. There are more and more people who are willing to share what they remember from the past.
I enjoy reading the comments on your Facebook posts as well, because you're right. There is this human connection that weaves itself to place and space that spans, in some instances, decades. So someone's relationship with a space or a business or a place in the 50s might have been different because it was a different business or looked different in the 70s. And there's always this connection to emotion or feeling or a loved one. My mom went there. I can remember my parents, or I can remember taking my siblings, or that's where we always went school shopping, or we had malts at the counter, you know. Mm-hmm. It is really neat for me to get kind of a flashback or a little look into the connection that people still care so deeply about what was, but also about what is today.
Right.
And I think that it's almost as if everyone who is actively following and engaging with your page, it's like, I wonder what he's going to post today. Because you don't follow a particular, okay, I'm only focusing this month on this area. It's just like, oh, what's Mr. Woodward thinking about today? What did he stumble across? And it's always really neat to see. Or you've done some really great coverage over Schlimmer Brothers. And my husband works for Schlimmer Brothers Metalworks. And so anytime any of that history comes up, I always, tag him and send it to him so he can read up on the history too, and have an appreciation for the family-owned business he gets to work for today that dates over 100 years ago, Yeah.
A little while back, I posted a picture of Penguin Point when it first started and talked about its history and then its closing. I had over 530 people respond to that with something that they remembered from that time. I wish I could find more sites like that they're interested in, but I try to have a variety. But you never know. I never thought Jenny died. The amount of posts I've had on that, I would have had that many posts. Or Penguin Point, 500 plus comments. How can you say that much? But people are interested, and they want to share, and they want to know more. And if this site can help to motivate, that's great. Back in 1980 and 81, I wrote a special feature for the paper called Peek at the Past. And that's the way I look at my website now or Facebook is that it's a peek. A peek at something that happened in the past. And if it interests you, that's great. That's what I'm hoping to do. If it gets you to think about your mom or dad and talk to them about it and find out more, that's even better. And if you share it with other people, that's fantastic. I wish we had more sites that did that kind of thing, because history is not just for the elite or the upper class or whatever you want to, or the country club set. History is for everyone, and they have a role and a place in it, and a very important part, and they need to be more aware of that. And again, that gets back to what I tried to do in the classroom, is make them aware that they were part of it. And as a teacher, one of the things I did was start a history club so that kids could become more involved and learn more about how you are a part of history. Our story might not become the one that is selected for a textbook, but on the other hand, it might just show up on a Facebook page.
Yeah.
You never know.
It has to be easier for you to do research now in the digital age. Is that correct? Or do you now have to just be more careful of your resource sites?
You have to be more careful of what's out there, because sometimes people make up their own history and pass it off and make themselves as a big hero in some major event. That sometimes happens, very rarely, but there's a name for the psychosis that involves. But people do that. Their life may be great as it is, but they have to be even greater, so they create or imagine. That sometimes happens. Also, our digital age has not really reached down into the community level as much as it could. Our newspapers, for most of Wabash County, we have them on microfilm, and they're available free in the library and a machine for you to use them. We have the originals over in the museum. They're available, but they haven't made it completely onto microfilm to where you can, I want to see the Wabash Plain Dealer, and they are doing that. It is taking place, but it is a slow process because there's so many thousands of pages. When it's finally completed in the next 2,000 or 3,000 years, or however long it takes, they will still find more documents that need to be recorded and documented. So not everything is in the internet today. Yeah. Not everything, by any means. There's enough to whet your appetite and to get you interested, but still, even those primary sources of newspapers and letters that do make it to microfilm and then do make it into the internet, sometimes you got to be careful. I did a study. I ran into an article of a young girl who the article said was from Somerset, who in the 1890s went to Chicago and disappeared. She was found drowned. Her boyfriend was a local druggist. And the name that he was using was the same name as who we call Dr. Holmes, the monster of Chicago, who murdered hundreds of people in his hotel. And, well, there's a lot to what he did, but she had run into him and died at his hands when he had started killing these people. And the newspaper article had this big write-up, and she was from Somerset. Well, that wasn't true. She moved to Rowan. she lived in Rowan, and the story was at Rowan. The newspaper had gotten it wrong. So you have to be very careful. Right now, I'm doing research on a young lady who grew up in Wabash, lived right out here somewhere along South Wabash Street, above a grocery store that her father ran, and she became an adventuress. And she ended up being one of the top 10 adventuresses in Chicago.
What does that mean, Mr. Woodward?
Oh, an adventurous. Well, I'm using a polite word. Let's start this way. At age 17, she ran away from Wabash with a traveling salesman to Logansport. After she went through his money, she went to New Orleans, where she learned how to be a companion.
And the word you used to describe
Adventurous.
Adventurous. I love it. I've already learned a new term. Okay, now I'm with you.
Okay, she becomes she
you.
learns her trade in New Orleans. Somehow she's being escorted by a sheriff from Chicago back to Chicago on a train. He falls in love with her, and instead of taking her to jail, he puts her up in a hotel. Okay? Now she learns from him. She's got more money. She's got a hotel room. Now she starts hitting the men with the big bucks. Within a year, she marries a millionaire from Milwaukee. Now, she's only 20, and he's 60 or 70 years old. Buys her everything she ever wants. Sugar daddy, full blown. Okay. She gets tired of him, goes to New York City to become an actress. Then he dies. She gets the money there. She goes back and gets all the training to be an actress, but she's not an actress. But anyway, she's running with the millionaire crowd. She's staying in hotels that run $200 a day when a normal hotel is $1.70. And just going on and on. Then she shows up at one of the billionaire's offices. I can't remember his name right now. She shows up at his office to his son's office and has a check from the father for $60,000. Now that's equivalent to about $1.5 million today. He won't deal with her. He says, I'll give you money to go back to Chicago. And he does. He gives her $10,000 to go back to Chicago on a train and pay her bills at the hotel. Instead, she pays her bills and doesn't have it, comes back and wants more. He says, no, I'm not going to. So she takes him to court and sues him. She gets $60,000. Her attorney, she marries. They end up with the $60,000 in Paris, France, and stay there until it's all gone. And then in the Wabash Plain Dealer, there's this little tiny article. This girl is writing to her mother and saying, I'm busted. I don't have any money. Can you send me some money to come home on? That's her story.
And this is the book you're working on now?
It's a story. It's just a story.
It's a story, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't have it all together yet, but boy, this is a fantastic, and she grew up in Wabash.
That's incredible.
But I could tell you more and more stories about people who became a success when you never thought they ever would.
That's kind of what I'm hoping we get to do when we sit down. I don't want our conversations to be scripted, just like what we did today. We sit down, it's already been an hour. We have already gone through an hour of conversation. And I just want to hear from Mr. Woodward. I may have specific questions, but I will always try to be as prepared. And then you'll get to tell me. Like, I'd like for you to say, hey, let's talk about, I mean, I could sit and listen to you tell stories like you just did about the adventurous, like all day, every day. Well, Mr. Woodward, that's been 1 hour.
Hi, I'm Ron Woodward, and these are the Woodward Chronicles. Thanks for listening.
The Woodward Chronicles podcast is made possible by the generous support of the Lisa Gilman Investment Fund, the Sandra Kunkel Trust, Mark and Amy Ford, Paperworks Industries, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County, and is created by Destination Wabash County.